Hey lovely people, this is the second part in my series about our emotional resilience and how to recover our mental health. If you missed the first one that I shared a little bit about the foundations that I use to underpin health, and I shared a little bit about my own personal story, so that you know that I'm not just coming from an academic sort of research point of view, or even just having escorted many of my patients back to health, but also so that you know that it's something that I wrestle with, and what I share with you has been forged in the fire of my own life. So I'm Dr. Sally. I'm the founder of Dr. Sally Bell. I'm a medical doctor. I've been a GP and have been qualified for over 21 years now. And a few years ago, I got tired of being a pharmaceutical vending machine and just treating diseases, and I changed how I practiced. And I created an approach to health that moves away from treating disease and treats you. It looks at getting to the root of the cause instead of just suppressing symptoms. And instead of just focusing on a part, it appreciates the whole of who you are and creates personalised health plans for you. I have a small clinic where you can come and see me, but at the moment I'm trying to make as much of what I do accessible online to help you recover your health. For my heart and passion in life is to put health back into your hands. So we're touching on emotional resilience. It's been a tough year. Here in England, we are just at the end of our second national lockdown, and we are approaching Christmas. And I want to touch on 5 things today that I think are key to recovering our emotional health. 4 are kind of attitudes that we need to take hold of, and 1 really is starting to focus on one of those foundations, and that being sleep and the importance of sleep. Before I say anything else, there's a time when we're in emotional and mental crisis where this isn't going to help, where actually there's a time for medication. There's a time for somebody actually stepping in and keeping you safe and keeping others safe. And so it might be that actually me talking about this won't help you because you're in a crisis state and you can't rationally get hold of what I'm saying. And it's really important in those times that you reach out. If you're too afraid to reach out to your doctor, an anonymous call to Samaritans can sometimes be, the beginning of that journey. But it might be your doctor, it might be a friend, it might be a family member, that might be your first course of action. And when you feel life has settled a little bit and you're out of that crisis zone, then something like what I'm going to share can help recover and restore and get you on that path back to healing. So that said, I'd like to share with you my 5 points that I have today. I think one thing that I think is most important is that we take responsibility for our own story and our own life, like regardless of the cards that were dealt you at the beginning of life, regardless of what has happened in our past, we get the opportunity to rewrite the ending. And part of that process is about taking responsibility for our own health. One of the things that I find with my patients is if they think I'm there to help recover their health, if it's seen as my responsibility, that I know that I'm just not going to get very far with this person. It is that moment in time when they realise that actually I'm there as the guide, I'm there as a resource, I'm there to support, but actually it is the individual's responsibility to take hold of that journey to recovery. And that was my own experience. Like, I shared a little bit about my own struggles. Back in my teen years, I struggled with an eating disorder and really had a distorted image of my own body. I also later in my 30s went on to have quite profound postnatal depression. And I can say with all of them, initially with that eating disorder, I knew I had a problem and I acknowledged the problem for a very long time. However, I was looking for everybody else to come and save me, to medicate me, to help me get out of that rut. And the moment that I realised that actually nobody was going to save me and I had to take responsibility for my own health and my own healing, that was the point that I really started that trajectory towards wholeness and wholehearted living. And the same when I struggled with postnatal depression, It was at that point where I started taking responsibility and incorporating some of the things that I knew and I learned, and taking on the advice of friends and family, and the things I was reading was the moment that I made a recovery. And that is the starting point. One, yes, acknowledging a problem, but two, then owning your journey. Now, that does not mean you're alone. That does not mean that everything has to come from you. Quite the contrary. The moment that you take responsibility, you can draw on a whole host of wisdom. There's so much out there, great books, great podcasts, great YouTube things. There are great courses. There is so much that you can use in that journey towards wholeness and recovering our emotional resilience and our mental health. I think my second point is a little bit shorter, is that it takes time. It's really important that you understand that it takes time. Often I listen to some of my patients, I listen to all of my patients' stories. One of the things I do is we have an hour at the beginning and I unpack their whole story. And I am always struck by how many people have had very difficult childhoods. And yet they courageously go on in life decade after decade, and then they come to me starting to fall apart, and often my response internally is, oh my goodness, how have you got so far having suffered so much? And I'm always surprised that people haven't fallen apart a whole lot earlier. And just as, all of those things through the years and the decades that maybe remain unresolved, how we eat, how we sleep, how we think, some of the trauma has done its damage, and brought us to a point where we're in crisis or we're struggling. So it is that the journey back, takes time. It takes doing the same thing every day. It takes, sometimes you might need help from a therapist. Sometimes it's about diet. Sometimes it is about medication. Sometimes it's about all of those little things. But often it's around, always, it does take time. And it's using all of those things to help us get well. My third point is that don't underestimate the power of self-coaching. Listen, we all talk to ourselves. We all have this internal chatter that is going on. Often it's just this rhetoric. Often it's been there since childhood, telling us stories of what people and parents have thought of us, and we entertain it, and it goes round and round in our head. Well, one of the key things to recovery is starting to become aware of our internal chatter. But two, it's also realizing that we can self-coach, that actually we can recreate some of those stories that we're telling ourselves. And if we leave the voices around us to be the ones that elevate us and push us on and help us recover, we will be sadly disappointed because people have got their own lives and they're busy with their own problems. And yes, it's lovely to have encouragement from friends, from therapists, and that's an important part of life. But we must never just leave it to others to help us recover our health. We must start considering recreating our own dialogue in our head, deciding how we're going to self-coach. And then I think that would bring me on to my last point before I want to talk briefly about sleep. And that is that we need to approach ourselves with compassionate curiosity. Certainly in my own life, I am my harshest critic. I am the first person to tear apart something I have done. I can be really nasty to myself before anybody has said, anything to me. And when I listen to the thousands and thousands of stories that I have done as a practitioner, as a doctor, your stories, you are so hard on yourself and so critical. And I think in order to recover emotional and mental health, one, it is listening to that internal chatter and But it's also realizing that some of those voices are not our own. Some of those voices and the things that are said about us come from teachers and parents and bosses and loved ones who maybe never intended to hurt you, but you have heard something that has become a dialogue in your head that informs and instructs you about what your identity is and who you are. And so while we pay attention to the internal chatter, that last point is actually we need to now start being curious and kind to ourselves and compassionate. We need to treat ourselves as our best friend, and we need to champion the effort that we're making in order to recover our emotional resilience and our mental health. So finally, I want to say that, I've explained in my previous videos many times that I use 5 foundations that underpin all of our health, and that is sleep, movement, rest, connection, and nutrition. And over the coming weeks, I'm going to unpack all of that in more detail, and explore can food affect our mood, and how movement and exercise plays a part in emotional resilience and mental health, and looking and unpacking connection with self, others, and that sense of purpose. And I will be looking at all of that. But if I'm really honest, especially when we're struggling with mental health and emotional issues, if I was to start with one foundation, if I was confused and didn't know, how to make headway, how to even get quiet and listen to my internal chatter, how to even choose to self-coach, how to even begin that journey of taking responsibility, I would always start with sleep. And sleep touches every single part of your body. There isn't an area of your body that it doesn't heal up. And when you look at emotional and mental health, those few hours before we get up, our brain, our body really focuses on healing up and kind of pressing the reset button on our emotional resilience and our mental health, and it processes and it heals us, and it kind of sets us up for the next day. And when we lose those hours of sleep, we're robbed of that ability for our brains to function properly when thinking about emotional and mental health. Now, for some people, they just need to prioritize sleep, but for others, I would fit in this camp. Sleep can be really elusive, and we can have every intention to try and get our sleep, but really struggle to get it. So what I've done is I'm going to cut into a talk that I gave to one of the institutions that I work with. I think halfway through I might reference recruits, so bear with me. But it just walks you through why sleep is important, but then it talks you through my sleep hygiene principles, that we can do to recover sleep. And if you want to start doing anything, I would spend the next few weeks just doing that. Every day, take all of those principles and make them their priority, and just establish better quality sleep. And then once you have that in place, we can start talking about what you eat and how you move and how you connect as the kind of next foundation to recovering your health. So I hope that's helped today. I'm going to cut in now. I'm going to try. I'm really bad digitally, but I'm learning to do this and to edit my films. But if you have any questions, any comments, if you think this is useful, then please share it. My heart is just to put tools back into your hands, as many people as possible, so that they can recover their health. Bless you, and I'll see you next time. Bye. A dive into sleep, and we must just never forget, it's all about context. It's all about those 5 foundations, and keep coming back to them and keep tweaking them and strengthening them in order for our body to have the greatest potential to heal and to help us fulfill the life that we all want to live. But as I said, Let's pop this on. I've popped up in the corner there. As I've said, like, sleep touches, I mean, every single part of our body. And when I was trained in the 90s, we knew that if you didn't sleep, you died. But we knew little else. And actually, I think our culture has degraded the value of sleep because we haven't understood how vitally important it is for performance and for health. And so therefore it's been squeezed out, and we put so much more emphasis on our productivity and our need to be enjoying ourselves and having a great family life and having a great work life, and sleep gets pushed out as those things are prioritized. But sleep science over the last sort of 20 years has just exploded, and our understanding of it is just incredible. And so going back to that slide, this just touches on some of the areas of our body. So let's take that top right one and talk about obesity for a minute. We are the fattest nation in Europe. 1 in 3 of us as adults are either obese or overweight. We have an alarming increase in our children being obese and overweight. And I think all of us know that it is unhealthy to be obese, and it's associated with lots of diseases. But I think what I want to say publicly is for 30 years we have got our health messages wrong. And we have banged on about this theory about calories in, calories out, and it's all about calories. And everybody who is obese is because they've eaten too much. I mean, I even remember, like when I was training, consultants saying to me, if they're fat and they say they're not eating, they're lying. Well, our understanding of obesity and in the research has come on hugely. And even though our health messages are still going on about calories, eating less and exercising more, we now understand obesity to be a complex problem to do with everything from what's going on with your gut bacteria to how your thyroid is functioning, to some of the chemicals in our foods, our agrochemicals that actually are driving and imitating some of the hormones around obesity. We know that stress promotes obesity. We know that broken relationships and social isolation will also drive that equation. And sleep, is one of the key foundations if we're looking at optimizing our weight. We have lots of chemical messengers in us, hormones we call them, and they are responsible for helping us find an optimal weight. And we know that when we are sleep deprived, that gets completely messed up. So we have a hormone that makes us feel full and makes us feel full, and when we sleep deprived, that gets suppressed, and so therefore our body doesn't know that is full, and therefore we're more prone to overeating. It also, when we're sleep deprived, we have a hormone called ghrelin, which increases our appetite and makes us feel more hungry, and when we're sleep deprived, that goes up, so again we're going to be overeating. And then even when you look at what happens sort of structurally and how the brain interacts when we're sleep deprived, that there's this kind of uncoupling between two centres, one that kind of helps you make good decisions and one that's sort of more spontaneous and is going to reach for that sugary snack, and there's a disconnection there, and you're going to be wired more for making poorer decisions. So when we're just thinking about something like obesity, actually sleep is foundational for optimizing our weight. Let's go through the list here. Sleep deprivation also is driving our problem with diabetes. Diabetes, we're spending £1 billion every year medicating a disease that is rooted in lifestyle. That's type 2 diabetes. Type 1 is a different disease. And again, we need to understand that it's not just about what we eat. What we eat does drive it, but again, sleep comes into that equation, and we know when we're sleep deprived that we have increased resistance to our sugar hormone, insulin. Looking at the road traffic accidents, we know when we're sleep deprived, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, that we're kind of sleepy at the wheel. But we think that's because we might have only got a few hours. But when you look at in the spring, when in the UK we put our clocks forward and we lose an hour's sleep, year on year, the next day, the number of road traffic accidents goes up. And that is just because of 1 hour less than we're used to. The impact that that's having on our reaction times and on our performance. And also, if you look at heart disease as well, on that day after of losing that hour's sleep when we put the clocks forward, we see, the spike in heart attacks go up as well. Again, just 1 hour and the impact that that's having on our body. Yes, let's look at increased mental health problems. So when we sleep, during that time, during the night, your body heals, has a preference for healing different parts of you. And towards the end of that kind of 8-hour cycle, your body focuses on emotional healing and problem solving and your creativity. And so when we miss those last couple of hours, and when we consistently are just having 6 hours sleep, we're actually robbing our body's ability to heal up emotionally, to increase our emotional resilience. And actually we problem solve at night. We sort out some of the things that are worrying us. There's that old saying about sleeping on a problem, and waking up and making a decision in the morning, because actually in the night, all of that is going on. And so when we're dealing with mental health issues, when we're dealing with emotional issues, when we're dealing with having to recover from trauma, like sleep is again your healer. And to negate addressing sleep issues when you're suffering with mental health, emotional or trauma issues, we're just not going to win. Sleep has to be foundational in that. And just a little note here about our teenagers. So our teenagers, their body clock and their sleep clock, their circadian rhythm clicks forward in their teenage years, and they will struggle to get to sleep earlier, because they're hormonally things have changed for them. And then what happens then is that because they're getting to sleep later, they might be missing that time when they're emotionally healing, because we're getting them up early for school. Or it might be that you have recruits that are very young and still in their teen years, and they're getting to bed a lot later because that's the way their body clock is wired. And then we're getting them up early, and they are losing that healing time when you're going to improve and heal your emotional health. And so therefore, I've got teenagers, and maybe some of the moods and the emotions that's going on isn't just some of the sex hormone changes and some of the challenges of being a teenager, but actually is simply a sleep issue. Yeah, and I mean, at the moment, we're currently in the whole COVID pandemic. And if you look down there on that third box on the right, we know that when we are sleep deprived, it reduces our ability to fight infection. It reduces our ability to keep us cancer free as well. We have a whole host of things going on when we are asleep that is all about keeping us disease free, cancer free, is all about keeping us infection free. So it's one of our biggest things that we can do to keep us from being sick from COVID is aggressively protecting our sleep time. So I think probably the question is, how much is enough? And I think I mentioned before, that's quite personalised. It's anything between sort of 7.5 to 9 hours asleep that is not in bed. You really need to understand that even people who are brilliant sleepers, I don't come across them very often, but even then their efficiency at sleeping is only about 90%. So that time in bed, 90% of it they will be asleep. So it's all about, you know, how long we are asleep, not how long we are in bed, and we need to account for that for those of us that take that little bit longer to get to sleep. Some good measures of have I had enough sleep are, do you need an alarm clock to wake you up? Do you wake up refreshed? Do you need a coffee to keep you going? Are you sleepy later in the day? And that can be an indicator of how restorative and how refreshing our sleep has been. So for some people, you know, it's just a matter of needing to turn off Netflix. Actually, let's just come back. It might be just a matter of turning off Netflix and needing to prioritize it. They had no idea how important sleep was. They didn't know that it was going to, you know, improve their performance at work. You know, I forgot to mention, you men, actually sleep deprivation puts your testosterone down and puts your libido down. So, you know, it's important that you're getting sleep from that point of view as well. And people just had no idea it was affecting all those aspects of their health. And actually it's just about prioritizing it. But then there's a whole group of us that actually find sleep hard, and I know that I need to sleep, and actually I can get in a pickle knowing that I need to sleep and then I can't sleep. And so there are some things that we can do to help us sleep, that we can tap into the way we're wired, and I'm just going to talk through those, and then we'll have some time for discussion at the end. So you can download this sheet from my website, and it's my cheat sheet for sleep hygiene. And sleep hygiene is about tapping into all of those pathways and the way we're wired to help us sleep. So let's work our way through them. So we were created and we have evolved over the years to very much respond to light, to sunlight. And a lot of our rhythms, our circadian rhythms, how our hormones work, all respond to daylight. And unfortunately, you know, over the last 50, 100 years, with the introduction of electricity and our wonderful lighting and TV, and we have lost our connection with those rhythms. And as a result, internally, some of those clocks that are controlling our sleep and our appetite, and they've gone haywire and they haven't caught up yet. And so the issue of light is really important. And so if you're trying to recreate a rhythm and improve your sleep, you need to think about light, and one of the things you need to be doing is getting out in the morning into the daylight, and that suppresses our sleep hormone. There's a particular hormone called melatonin, you might have heard of that, and then you want that melatonin suppressed in the morning and you want it to ping up later at night. But the issue is that in the evenings, with our LED lighting, the blue light from our screens, from our phones, they signal to our body that it's still daylight, and that blue light suppresses that melatonin, and your body cannot hear that it's tired, and it cannot tell that it's time for bed. So you know, one of the key things is around exposure to daylight in the morning, but when it comes to the evening, you need to think about screens. We have our night modes, but you need to think about lighting too. I have a bit of a routine around our home, especially during winter months, where I turn out the big lights, I put on the lamps, I close the curtains, I darken things, I take things down. And then, you know, not having exposure to screens directly before bed. So not having TV in your room, not using your phones. If you have to, you can buy blue blocker glasses from Amazon, and they will work to further reduce your exposure to blue light. That might help. And some of the research shows that as soon as you stop using your screen, it can take a couple of hours for that sleep hormone to pop up. And so really, if we're going to tap into the brilliance of how our body works, we have to think about light. I think my next biggest tip is about caffeine. So caffeine is a psychoactive drug, and it's found in tea and coffee and green tea and chocolate and pop. And there's another signal in our body that our brain monitors, and it helps it know that it's sleepy. And it's a chemical called adenosine. You don't have to remember the words, but it builds up during the day in our brain, and our brain can't get rid of it until it's time to sleep. And it gets to a level where it's really high, and that relationship with melatonin, our sleep hormone, and adenosine, it signals to the body that it's time to sleep. And your brain will shut down and you'll get to sleep. But caffeine sits on those sleep receptors in our brain, and it can't hear that chemical signal. It's completely deaf to it. It has no idea, and it doesn't know that it's time to sleep, and it doesn't know that it's tired. And caffeine can stay in our body from anything to 6 to 12 hours, depending on how well you detoxify. So that coffee you've had at midday may still be lingering in your body when it comes to nighttime and bedtime, and your body just can't hear the chemical signals that are telling it that it's time to sleep. So really tapping into the light thing, and keeping all caffeine to the earlier in the day is probably your biggest winners to start with when you're thinking about sleep. So this is all about routine, and it's about tapping into those body clocks, tapping into how our body's wired. I've been talking about all these circadian rhythms and talking about body clock, and everything in our body just runs on clocks. Our digestion does, our sleep does, our sex hormone does, our just everything. And so it's connecting in with that. And so actually, when you're tapping into light and you're tapping into getting caffeine out your system, the next thing is having that routine, the same bedtime at night and getting up in the morning at the same time, and doing that night after night after night. And your body just gets so confused where one night is 2 hours later, one night it's an hour later, an hour earlier, and so it's just not able to regulate, and then you're kind of working against with those hormones that are helping you sleep. So getting into a routine is really important. And just to say here that those that kind of like to burn the candle at both ends during the week and catch up at the weekend, the evidence shows that you miss out on the healing, and it's a healing that you can never get back, and that damage that you do day on day and week on week is permanent, and it's not something that can be undone. So yes, have a sleep in at the weekend, but your default should be that you have the same routine and adequate sleep every night. Let's just mention exercise. So, exercise is great for stress relief. Exercise is helpful with sleep, but really hard exercise, when you're really pushing it late in the evening, can have a counter effect, because actually it can stress your body too much, and then your stress hormones up, and therefore that can not help with sleep. But sometimes types of exercise that are relaxing, your yoga, a slow run, a relaxing walk, can all help improve sleep. This takes me on to my next thing, which is all about stress. Now, the stress response, and it's another hormone, cortisol, that's messaging your body to go into all sorts of, to operate in all sorts of ways, which I spoke about earlier. And one of the things is it wants you hyper alert, and it doesn't want you to sleep. And so managing stress is a massive part of good sleep. And that's why earlier I talked about it being hand in hand. Sleep and stress management really do go hand in hand, because if you don't do the stress management, you won't get the sleep, because that cortisol will stay high, and usually what it does is either you struggle to get to sleep, or you wake up about 3 or 4 o'clock because it's too high. And it's at that point in our rhythm, our 24-hour rhythm, that our cortisol should be at its lowest. And so having an approach to sleep that starts before the moment that you get into bed is really important. Understanding that need to wind down, and that you cannot expect your body just to suddenly switch off. And there needs to be a process, leading up to sleep that kind of helps you relax. And so things that we know improve, that tap into stress management. And again, this is a whole talk in itself, but I cover them briefly. Things like, don't underestimate the power of deep belly breathing for pulling you out of that stress response. Don't underestimate the power of just journaling, writing, debriefing. There are some lovely techniques where you might lie still and do a body map where you just notice all the sensations in your body and you go through it and you relax, or you might go through all the systems in your body, tensing each area and then relaxing. All of these things are helping to bring that stress hormone down. The last couple of things I would want to say is that we need to keep our bedroom for sleep and sex. If you are eating in your bed and checking your emails and looking at your phone and watching TV, your body will associate that place with those things, where if you just keep it for sleep and sex, that's all your body associates it with, and it will help you get quality sleep. I often get asked about supplements. You cannot out-supplement caffeine, routine, tapping into the light thing. Like, you can supplement for England and you will not be able to undo the damage of ignoring those other things. However, they do have a place. Sometimes when somebody's doing all of those things, I would look at, there's some evidence around using magnesium, using a valerian root. I stay away personally from using any prescription sleeping tablets. I only ever use them if somebody is at risk to themselves or at risk of harming somebody else. I think the evidence shows that they are deeply damaging because they do not let us get natural sleep, and therefore we are unconscious to the world, but we don't tap into any of that healing. And so I do not think they have a part to play in tackling sleep issues. And if you're finding that you're dependent on sleeping tablets, that's the time to get some other help, which I'm about to go on to help get off them, to help restore our natural sleep. I want to mention a couple of things before we have any discussion. So just a couple of things I want to mention: a disease called sleep apnea. So, and because you really need to go and get some help for that. Sleep apnea often is with people who are overweight, but not completely. They usually snore very heavily, and it's often their partners that say, I think they've stopped breathing at night. And they have these sleep patterns where they snore, stop breathing for a period of time, and then suddenly they take a deep breath and they start again. And what's happening is that they're never getting into deep sleep. They're constantly they're not aware of it, but they're constantly staying in light sleep. And they can go on for weeks and years not getting into restorative sleep. And it's very, very damaging to health. If you're worried you think you might have it, it's your partner saying that you're stopping breathing at night, you never wake up refreshed, and you're excessively sleepy in the daytime. And it's really important that you go and talk to your doctor. You can have sleep studies, and there are remedies to it. And I think I just put on that slide there that there's something called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, which at the British Lung Foundation, blf.org, you can actually go and do that score and see your sleepiness score, and that's something you could go and take to speak to your GP about. And then finally, there's people that have had issues with sleep all of their life, or there's people who do all of those things and are still really struggling. And actually, for some people, I get nervous about giving this presentation because sometimes I think I can cause more anxiety because now they know sleep's important, but they're still struggling to sleep. And then I've made them more stressed and they can't sleep because they're not sleeping. Now, there is a brilliant resource called Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, Insomnia. And I think it trumps all of the stuff I've said. It's going into why we get stressed with sleep. It goes into some of the thought patterns behind it, and it uses some techniques that helps restore sleep. And cognitive behavioural therapy is something, insomnia is something we're starting to get on the NHS. But again, I put a couple of links on that slide there. The Sleep Foundation and the Insomnia Clinic have good resources around how to access, well, what CBTI is and how to access that. And if you find that you can't use my cheat sheet and some of those sleep hygiene things and they're not working, then then CBTI is for you. Or if you've had really long-standing sleep issues since a child, again, I think hand in hand, your sleep hygiene with your CBTI would be a winner for you. So I hope I have helped you understand the importance of sleep, how it just touches every part of you. I hope I have given you an idea of how much sleep you need, and I hope I've given you an idea of some of the things that you can do to tap into how your body's functioning in order to optimize your sleep. So if you've got any questions now, we can have that, but it's been great to talk about sleep. You can find more information on my website. I'm always blogging about it. But yes, any questions?